Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Been dying to get back to the lake? Want to know who was there to hear Ray Bob's last breath while lingering on the phone, ready to pounce on evil? Well, then you've come to the right place. Settle yourselves in for an epic tale of redemption and loss, chock full of explosions and blood, a direct sequel to A Return to Locust Lake, a follow-up story that Doughboy420 likes to call Locust Lake, the Demon's Dozen.
The woman put the old phone back on its receiver and let out a soft, painful sigh as she looked down onto the floor. There, beside her bed, sat a duffel bag packed full of anything and everything she needed. The middle-aged woman slowly crouched down, grabbed the duffel bag, slipped on her shoes, and went out the door, locking it behind her. She had spent the last decade or so preparing for this very moment. She knew that the day would come when she would have to return to that damn place, and she wanted to be prepared for it. Hours passed, then days. The woman drove almost non-stop, only resting once at a truck stop in her trip across the country. The woman's muscles tensed as she gripped the steering wheel, memories of her lost friends, now accompanied by years of preparation. She'd traveled from state to state, picking up whatever knowledge and skills she could, training in different gyms. She worked dozens of different jobs over the years and would even place her odds in a game of pool here and there, honing her skills and becoming a pool shark over time. There was even a time or two when she entered underground fights against both women and men, and won. She took up nearly any job she could, but she never disrespected herself, and never let anyone else do so either. A 4-day-long trip, nearly non-stop, across the United States, she finally arrived at her destination, a little town that sat nearby her target, Halstead, her childhood home. The woman parked her car in the parking lot of the local hotel and entered.
"Hello,"
she said to the woman at the counter.
"Hello, dear. What can I do for you?"
The woman behind the counter asked. Her name tag read Lorraine.
"I'd like a room, please."
The woman asked.
"We charge $89 a night for one person, deluxe rooms, or $96 for 3 or 4 people, or..."
Lorraine began to explain.
"It's just me,"
the woman explained, before reaching into her duffel bag and rifling through it for a moment before pulling out a handful of cash.
"Here's $650. I need a room for a week. This ought to cover it,"
the woman said, handing Lorraine the wad of cash.
Oh my. I'm afraid I'm going to need a credit card or some kind of checking information,"
Lorraine explained. This prompted the woman to again reach into her bag, this time pulling out another $100 bill.
"This ought to cover it. Don't worry, there won't be any damages, and if there is, I can cover it,"
the woman said, looking Lorraine dead in the eye.
All right, thank you very much. Here you go. Room 237 is available,"
Lorraine said, taking the money from the woman and happily handing her a key. The woman grabbed the key with a smile and made her way up to her hotel room, lugging her heavy duffel bag the entire way. Upon entry to her room, the woman quickly locked the door behind her and set her bag down onto the bed before collapsing down next to it. She was exhausted. She'd traveled nearly without rest the entire way, and now she was at her destination. But as she lay there, she began to think about what her next step would be. She'd gone through this day 1,000,000 times in her mind and had devised a plan that she'd hoped would work. After all, she wasn't the only one left who was affected by the horrors of Locust Lake. Soon, the tired woman drifted off to sleep, feet still in her boots, which were still planted upon the floor. The woman awoke the next morning, sun shining in through the half-open curtain and beating down on her face. She calmly stood up and began to prepare for the day ahead. After the woman got dressed from her shower, she grabbed her bag and out the door she went, locking it behind her. She drove across the bridge into the residential part of town and turned onto Turkey Woods Road, an old dirt road that ran along the river. She planned to pay a visit to the guy that lived on the outskirts of town. She didn't know if he would even help her, but she had a gut feeling that he would help her really put an end to this. The woman pulled the car off the road to a small house with a beautiful view of the Susquehanna River. Soon, the woman found herself knocking upon the door of a complete stranger's house. Well, not a complete stranger. He knew her, but she didn't exactly know him.
Hello, can I help you, miss?
The older man, of about 60 or so, said calmly after opening the door.
Gregory Benjamin?
The woman asked, the man's last name stirring up memories within her.
Yes?
The man replied.
The same Gregory Benjamin who worked on the Todd Jacobs case?
The woman asked. The man's demeanor then changed from calm and welcoming to sad and reclusive.
I'm sorry, you've got the wrong guy.
The man said before attempting to close the door on her.
Please!
The woman exclaimed.
The killings have started again. We need to stop them.
She continued.
I got that poor guy killed. Because of me, he was found guilty for all the Locust Lake killings, and for the deaths of all those people around town. And he was put to death for it. And he wasn't guilty of killing a single one of them. Not one of them!
Gregory said to her, beginning to break down.
You can't change the past, Mr. Benjamin, but you can change the future, and you can help make things right.
The woman pleaded. The man sobbed a bit before looking back up at the woman, tears still in his eyes.
How am I supposed to do anything? I'm just an old man with a guilty conscience and a drinking problem.
Gregory said to her.
Let me come in and explain.
The woman said calmly.
What did you say your name was, miss?
He said suspiciously.
You don't recognize me?
She said.
38 years ago, you were working a case at Locust Lake. Several people were found murdered at the lake, and you were there the day they were found.
She continued.
Yes.
Gregory said.
It was pretty gruesome. I'll never forget that day. All the blood, all the bodies pinned to that tree, and that little girl's cries.
Mr. Benjamin added, remembering the hell that unfolded before his eyes on that day, all those years ago.
A baby girl? A girl named...
The woman hinted to him. The man's eyes widened with realization as to whom was at his door.
Shiloh?
Gregory said. The woman nodded to him, confirming his guess to be correct.
My, how you've grown. I can't believe the woman that you've grown into.
Gregory said, his demeanor again changing to a more cheerful and welcoming one, but still with a hint of the sorrow that had haunted him.
Can you help me?
She asked again.
I don't know how I could.
Gregory said.
I want to hunt down and kill the demons that live at Locust Lake.
Shiloh explained.
Excuse me?
Mr. Benjamin asked, kind of confused at the request to go on a demon hunt.
I need you to find some capable people that could help us stop them. The ones who are really responsible for all the deaths at Locust Lake.
Shiloh told him.
That's a job for the police. We can't do anything.
Gregory told her. It was then that Shiloh reached into the duffel bag at her feet and pulled out a large wad of cash, held together with a rubber band.
Will you help me or not?
Shiloh said.
I think I might know a few people.
Mr. Benjamin answered without a moment of hesitation, his demeanor changing for a third time to that of a wave of shock and awe. It took the two of them a few more days of preparation, but after a few phone calls and a couple of nights at the bar, they had a room full of people. Aside from her and Gregory, only 10 other people showed. She assumed that no one else was crazy enough to take on the Locust Lake killers. Shiloh had wanted an army, as much firepower as possible to put a stop to the curse forever. But now, she only had a dozen, including herself and an old man, whom she had no intention of dragging along with her. But he was inspired by her visit out of the blue, and he wanted to put a stop to the madness as much as she did. The room was filled of all kinds of characters. Each of them took turns introducing themselves. There was Ed Brody, a big guy with a kind heart. He spent a lot of his time working out, and when he wasn't working out, he was at the shooting range with his gun. But that wasn't all there was to him. The guy also gave money to charity and helped build small homes for the homeless in his off time. The guy had helped rebuild the camp a few years back, and he felt connected to it. Like he was responsible. Juliet Lethem was next up. She felt like she owed Mr. Benjamin, seeing as back when he was a cop and she was a know-it-all teen, she was heading down the wrong road, stealing from people and doing drugs. He arrested her, but he didn't judge her. Instead, Mr. Benjamin tried to help the girl, and he eventually turned her life around. She still got into a little trouble with pickpocketing people here and there, but she no longer did drugs, and she only stole what she needed. But she also didn't turn down an opportunity to legitimately make money. Brent Willard and Kathy Chime, a couple of young at heart 20-somethings that wanted to earn money to move out of Kathy's basement. They were completely unprepared for the situation, but they both knew the area pretty well. Adam Howard, self-proclaimed Hand of God. The man meant well and did do good, but he was a bit of a zealot at times. He was there to rid the lake of evil spirits and bring the righteous light of God. Malyssa Eldridge was the opposite of Adam Howard, a true skeptic. She didn't believe in evil spirits or monsters or even God for that matter. She was not only there to prove that the murders of Locust Lake had been committed by flesh and blood, mortal, human beings, but also because she needed the money to pay for college. Next up was Ken Kaiser, a former Marine that had been dishonorably discharged for getting in one too many fights. He kept the crew cut and continued his training. He may no longer have been officially in the military, but he loved the life and became a military collector, collecting anything and everything having to do with the military, primarily the United States Armed Forces, but also from various armies from around the world. He had quite the extensive gun collection, and he had been kind enough to supply the expedition with some weapons and ammunition. Next up was a man that was about as old as Mr. Benjamin. He introduced himself as Judd Thompson, and he had just buried his friend the day before. He and Ray Bob had been drinking buddies for decades, and now his friend was gone. He still had a bit of a beer gut and some muscle on him for an old man, and he came across as a bit intimidating, but he had a certain sorrow in his voice, and Shiloh knew that he was a good man.
I'm sorry,
Shiloh said.
Ray Bob was a close friend of mine too.
She added,
Thank you, Shiloh. Ray Bob told me a lot about you.
Judd said.
I'm gonna kill that sumbitch that killed my friend.
Judd added, before sitting down. The next man in line had a pretty close connection to Shiloh as well, Brad Wilson, the former boss of the lumberjacks that had been cutting trees through the area around Locust Lake, and the boss of Shiloh's friend, Ben, another victim of Locust Lake. Brad was supposed to be there, and he felt guilty that he wasn't there to help them, even though there was little he could have done, and he didn't even know why he was there now. Shiloh looked down to the ground while the man spoke. She felt responsible for Ben's death. But there was nothing that Brad could have done. He wasn't there. But she was. She was right there through it all. And she still felt responsible for all of it, even after all this time. Finally, the last member of this damn dozen was Chris Jacobs. He'd been in quite a bit of trouble with Gregory over the years back when he was a cop, but unlike some of the others whom were thankful for Mr. Benjamin, he had a pretty deep-seated hatred for Greg. Not only did Chris hate him for the numerous arrests for mischief involving fire and explosives, and the time he spent in prison because of it, but also because Greg Benjamin was responsible for the death of his favorite cousin, Todd Jacobs. And although his hatred for Mr. Benjamin kept him from liking him, it didn't keep him from accepting his money, especially if he could also show to the rest of the world that his cousin was innocent all along. To say that these 12 men and women were a dysfunctional dozen was an understatement. The bunch of them were severely outmatched by the horrors that resided in and around Locust Lake. Shiloh was the only one that knew the true monsters that awaited them at the camp. Together, the bunch of them devised a plan to hunt down the monsters. They figured there was safety in numbers, so they planned to divide into 2 teams. Team A would consist of Shiloh, Gregory, Brad, Malyssa, Judd, and Juliet, while Team B was comprised of Ken, Adam, Chris, Brent, Kathy, and Ed Brody. Before each group set off for Locust Lake, they were all given strict orders to stay within their respective groups and for everyone to watch each other's backs. The groups had to stick together if they wanted to survive. An hour or so later, Ken Kaiser's team was the first to arrive at the once again closed-down camp at the new Forest Trails State Park. The lake had changed its name several times, but no matter how many coats of paint you put on an old car, the rust will always eat through. Almost immediately after jumping out of Ken's Blazer, the 2 young ones of the group, Brent and Kathy, decided to venture off on their own.
Excuse me. Now, where do you think you 2 are going?
Asked Mr. Kaiser sternly. Piss off, old man, Brent said while flipping Ken off. Then both he and Kathy turned and walked hand in hand toward one of the cabins.
Dumb kids. They're gonna get themselves killed,
Ken grumbled.
Come on, everyone. We may as well all be close by,
he added, motioning for the rest of the group to follow him to a nearby cabin, one within eyeshot of the one that the young couple had gone into. Just a few minutes later, Shiloh and her team arrived at the camp. The woman sighed as she got out of the car. The other group had already gone off on their own, and Shiloh feared that they wouldn't last long in this place. She also began to feel as though maybe she'd made a mistake in bringing them here. If they got killed, their blood would be on her hands.
Come on,
Shiloh said, as she began to walk toward the store and diner, the rest of her group following her and toward the building with police tape over the door. Not only were they risking death, but they were also risking jail time for messing with a crime scene. but it wasn't like the police needed to collect evidence there. They all knew who was responsible. Meanwhile, near to the camp entrance, the young couple that had ventured off on their own had sat down at the edge of a bed in one of the cabins, and it wasn't long before Brent decided to take advantage of their time alone by placing his hand on Kathy's thigh and kissing her neck softly.
Really, Brent?
Kathy said, a bit aggravated. What? Come on, baby. Brent spoke to her, moving his hand further up her thigh.
Seriously, dozens of people were brutally murdered here less than a week ago, and you want to screw me? What the fuck, man?
Kathy said. Brent began, but before he could answer, the two of them were startled by something being knocked over in another room.
What was that?
Kathy asked quietly. I don't know, Brent whispered back. The two of them slowly approached the door to the next room, guns in hand. Brent quickly swung the door open, and the two of them aimed their weapons into the next room, where they found a lamp knocked down onto the floor. They looked around, but didn't see anything else. Then, suddenly out of the shadows, crawled a large raccoon that caused Kathy to shriek and Brent to pull the trigger on his gun. But, due to his lack of experience with firearms, nothing happened, because the safety was on. The creature scurried out the door and squeaked out the half-open window near the entrance of the cabin. Damn thing almost got shot, Brent yelled, gripping his chest while breathing heavily. Kathy just chuckled a bit before saying,
Ooh, big scary Brent. You forgot to take the safety off. Good job. Quite the hero.
Followed by a bit of a sarcastic applause. Kathy expected to get some smart-ass remark from her boyfriend, but instead, she saw fear in his eyes, before the boy struggled quickly, fumbling with his gun, trying desperately to flip the safety off, but before he could manage to do so, Kathy felt 4 long spikes impale her and through her, driving her forward, before then being driven into Brent, pinning the two of them together against the wall of the cabin with a large pitchfork held by the gray, mold-covered hands of Casper Stoical. While the two lovers were being stuck to the wall, Shiloh and crew had made it inside the diner area. There was still food sitting around, rotting, because when shit hit the fan, people found an exit as fast as possible, or were killed in the process.
Ew, it stinks in here.
Juliet spoke up.
Yeah, rotting food and death aren't a pleasant combination.
Malyssa said.
Let's have a look around, but everyone stay close, and if you see anything, shoot first and ask questions later.
Shiloh said. Then the group of 6 broke off into 2 smaller groups of 3. Shiloh, Greg, and Judd went down the aisle containing all the little trinkets and knickknacks, while Malyssa, Brad, and Juliet went toward the opposite side of the area where the beverage and cold produce freezers were. It was when the trio of them made it to the end of the row of freezers that things quickly went south. From around the corner where several rows of soda cases were stacked, stepped a tall figure, face covered with a wooden mask tied around his waterlogged flesh, and body cloaked in a long black coat, all ripped and ragged. It was the monster, Jacob Treagle. Before the 3 of them could even react, the monster grabbed a hold of Brad, tossing him into the stacks of cases of soda cans, causing him to fall into a sticky pile of cardboard, cans, and carbonation, nearly crushing him in the process. This was followed by Jacob grabbing a hold of young Malyssa, who was now in complete shock at the realization of something she didn't believe in, now standing right in front of her, and the large monster tossed her effortlessly into the glass door of the freezer, causing bits of glass to rain down upon her. This was followed by her then being driven down onto a large shard of glass, which impaled her through the stomach. Juliet reacted on instinct and began unloading on Jacob, firing several rounds from her .45 into the monster's back and alerting everyone else in the camp of the attack. The wounds only enraged Jacob, causing him to turn his attention toward Juliet. The young woman continued to fire upon him, but it had little effect, and she only managed to fire off a few more rounds before she too was grabbed by Jacob, who lifted the poor girl up off the ground as she kicked and screamed. She attempted to shoot the monster once again, but quickly dropped her gun and gripped Jacob's arms as he squeezed her head with his hands, squashing her skull with a sickening crunch before dropping her lifeless body to the floor. While Shiloh, Greg, and Judd were running toward the gunfire, so too were the remaining members of Ken's crew. Ken, Adam, Chris, and Ed all ran outside in time to find the wide form of Casper Stoical standing in front of them, unmoving and unmovable. Ken and Ed didn't even think. Immediately the two of them opened fire on Casper. Ken with 2 large pistols and Ed with a pump-action shotgun. The two of them managed to unload a few shells and bullets into Casper's brutish form, but even with the heavy damage to his midsection, it had little effect. The beast quickly grabbed the first thing he could use as a shield, and the first thing within his reach was Adam, who was the first out the door. Adam was hit in the back with friendly fire before Ken and Ed were able to stop. The man prayed for mercy, but he found none. Casper then charged the 2 gun-wielding men, using Adam as a kind of battering ram, smashing his body against them, causing them both to drop their weapons and breaking the man's spine in the process. Back inside the diner, Shiloh, Greg, and Judd had just discovered the bodies of the 2 deceased girls.
My lord, those poor girls,
Judd said, in a bit of a shock. Shiloh sighed a bit. Her fears were realized, and she felt as though these losses of life were because of her. This blood was now on her hands.
We shouldn't have come here. This place only takes. It takes, and takes, and takes from you until you have nothing left,
Greg said, somewhat angry at the life in which this land had inflicted upon him, even through second-hand contact. The 3 of them heard a pained grunt from just a dozen or so feet away, causing them all to turn toward the sound and ready their weapons. The 3 of them watched in anticipation as a pile of cases of soda cans began to stir, and then, out from underneath the mess of soda cans, crawled a pretty bruised-up Brad.
Oh my god, are you alright?
Shiloh said, relieved that Brad was all right.
Ouch. Yeah, I'm alright. Ow. For the most part.
Brad grumbled in pain.
What happened?
Gregory then asked.
We got attacked by this big guy with a wooden mask.
Brad managed to answer.
It's Jacob Treagle. We need to find the others and get out of here. It was a mistake bringing you here.
Shiloh began to apologize, but she was interrupted by Ed Brody bursting through the door of the diner.
Come on, we need to help Ken,
Ed said, breathing heavily and motioning for the rest of them to follow him outside. The group of them made their way outside, where they found Ken standing down by the lake, and just a few yards away from him was the beast, Casper Stoical.
What in God's name is he doing?
Judd asked, as soon as he found out.
Come on, you stinking piece of shit. You smell like your mama flushed you down the toilet, and you look like it too.
Ken yelled to Casper, coaxing him into an attack. The beast advanced forward toward Ken, whom also advanced toward Casper. The 2 of them collided, and Ken immediately began to punch the brute in his sack-covered face, pounding his fists into the stitchwork mask that hung loosely around Casper's neck. Then, suddenly, just as the onslaught began, it had stopped, as Casper grabbed a hold of Ken's fist, dwarfing it within his own monstrous mitt. Ken then let out a scream of pain as the beast crushed his fist just like it was a ball of paper, flattening it with his own larger fist. Ken Kaiser looked up at the stitchwork hood before him and watched as a fist hammered down directly into the center of his face, shattering the bones just like he had previously done with Ken's hand. Ken laughed a bit, spitting blood out in the process. Casper looked at him, tilting his head inquisitively to the side.
At least I can't smell you anymore,
Ken said, barely able to breathe. Casper then delivered a second powerful blow, this time to Ken's chest, obviously breaking the man's ribs.
We need to help him,
Shiloh said, but before she could do anything, Greg grabbed her arm and stopped her.
I'll see you in hell, motherfucker,
Ken managed to gasp out, before pulling the pin from the grenade within his pocket and punching his remaining fist into the beast's rotten stomach with the grenade in hand, and mere seconds later, the two of them were blown to pieces, that then fell back to earth, scattering across the ground and into the lake. The rest of them stood there in complete shock. Ken had sacrificed himself to save the rest of them, and now both he and Casper lay in pieces everywhere. For a moment, the group of them even felt a brief bit of respite, but the peace was shattered when they began to notice movement down by the lake where Ken and Casper had squared off.
What?
Ed asked, pointing toward the water ahead of them. The bunch of them watched as bits and pieces of flesh began to slither and slide across the ground, bits of bone and bunches of flesh writhing and rolling toward the waters of the lake. The terrified group watched as rotting hunks of meat and yellowed, broken bones all crawled to the water and formed back together into the form of the large beast of a man. The flesh fused back together, and the burned clothing mended itself into the form it once was, and Casper was born anew once again. In shock, the remaining people ran in the opposite direction, which was unfortunately deeper into the woods. They ran as fast as they could up one of the many trails until they found themselves at the small ranger's cabin set at the edge of the ridge along the trail. Together, the five of them piled into the cabin and shut the door behind them, all of them nearly out of breath.
What?
Ed began between gasps of breath.
What the hell was that? That thing blew up and then put itself back together like a frickin' Terminator. How the hell are we supposed to kill something like that?
Ed asked, in panic and confusion. He was a big, tough guy, but even the biggest and toughest cannot defeat some things.
That
Shiloh breathed heavily.
Was Casper stoical?
She finished.
Wait, where's Chris?
Ed asked.
Those kids went off by themselves, but Chris was with me, Adam, and Ken.
He explained.
I take it Adam didn't make it.
Greg asked.
I'm afraid not. Chris must have taken off when we were attacked.
Ed answered.
Do you know where Brent and Katy are?
Shiloh asked.
They went into one of the cabins near the entrance.
Ed replied.
Shit.
Shiloh said, attempting to formulate a plan in her head.
They're probably already dead.
Gregory said quietly.
Hey man, don't say that. I'm sure they took off at the first sound of gunfire and are on their way to the cops right now.
Brad spoke up.
No.
Shiloh interrupted.
He's probably right. They're probably dead. Like Gregory said, this place only takes... I've only gotten lucky, and it's only a matter of time.
Shiloh began, before taking a deep breath and continuing.
Come on, since we can't go back down the mountain, there's only one way to go.
She said, changing the conversation.
Up,
Brad said.
To the logging trail on the other side of the mountain.
He finished.
You people must be out of your minds. I'm heading down the mountain to the road. I'm getting out of here,
Judd said, before opening the cabin door to make his escape. The man then turned to exit, only to bump into the chest of a much taller figure. It was a tall monster of a man, wearing a ragged, black trench coat and an old wooden mask. It was Jacob Treagle, the monster of the Black Woods. Judd didn't have time to react before the monster's hands were upon him, ripping him violently out of the cabin and throwing him into the rough dirt trail. There, Jacob turned to again grab a hold of the man, now laying face down in the dirt, but this time Jacob stepped down onto his back and pulled his torso backwards, ripping Judd in half at the waist before discarding his upper half beside his lower. Shiloh had enough. She knew that she couldn't help Judd, but what she could do is buy the rest of them enough time to escape. While Judd was being split in two, Shiloh had reached into the duffel bag that she carried with her and was now lighting a rag that was stuffed into a bottle.
Hey, Jacob,
Shiloh yelled.
Have a trip down memory lane,
she added, tossing the Molotov onto Jacob, setting him ablaze. The remaining 4 members of the crew took off up the trail as Jacob flailed around on fire. Shiloh knew it wouldn't stop him for long, but would give them enough time to escape further up the mountain. The final 4 were out of breath, but had finally arrived at the old quarry at the top. Above that was Bear Camp Ranger Station, and beyond that, on the other side of the mountain, was the logging road. It was at that time, much like his employee years before him, Brad collapsed onto the ground, invoking memories of Ben in Shiloh.
I don't think I can go much further,
Brad said, gripping his side.
Come on, it's not much further to the road, and then it's all downhill from there. You can make it,
Shiloh told him.
Would have figured. Done in my soda,
Brad said, chuckling a bit.
Come on, Brad, don't talk like that,
Ed said, wrapping an arm around Brad and pulling him up to his feet. A kind of ethereal laughter echoed through the trees. The laughter grew from a giggle to a full-on cackling. Then, suddenly, she appeared. The zombie-like woman, jaw hanging unnaturally to make a freakish grin, cuts and bruises covering her skin, and clothing covered in rips and mud. It was Dr. Clark.
Didn't anyone ever tell you that soda pop is bad for you?
Dr. Clark said, leaning in toward the group of them.
It's bad for your teeth.
Dr. Clark yelled before thrusting a rotted arm forward into Brad's open mouth, breaking through his teeth and pushing down his throat. Brad gasped for air and tried to breathe, but he couldn't. Quickly, the woman's invading arm choked the man to death before she withdrew it from the man's bulging throat. Shiloh and Greg opened fire on Dr. Clark, but every bullet that hit her seemed to disappear into a puff of black smoke. She was completely unfazed by any form of physical attack. Dr. Clark only laughed as the two of them wasted their ammunition on her, but it was Shiloh who had the last laugh after retrieving yet another explosive from her bag, a homemade pipe bomb that she had constructed from PVC pipe. Shiloh lit the fuse, just like the Molotov before, and tossed it at the apparition. The bomb exploded in a large blaze, and Dr. Clark was now just a cloud of black smoke lingering in the air. But just like Jacob before her, Casper knew that Dr. Clark wasn't dead, and that she would be back for more. The 3 that remained quickly made their way up around the quarry's edge, on past Bear Camp, and into the woods. Soon, the forest opened into a small field where trees had been cleared out over time. Shiloh looked around to find the burial mound that she had desecrated years prior, along with several others, and a few dozen yards away from them were some branches and a large sign, and beyond that, a dirt parking lot connecting to an old road.
There it is,
Shiloh said, pointing to the road. Not so fast. A man's voice yelled from the shadows of the now darkening forest. It's your fault my cousin's dead, the man yelled, stepping out of the forest, revealing himself to be Chris. Chris was holding a shotgun aimed at Gregory because he blamed him for the death of his cousin.
Chris, put down the gun,
Shiloh spoke.
No, he may not have stuck the needle in my cousin's arm, but he sure as hell gave it to the one that did,
Chris said, with a tear in his eyes.
Come on, Chris. He's not responsible.
Ed began.
No, he's right.
Greg interrupted.
If it weren't for me, Todd Jacobs would still be alive. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't hate myself for the part I played in all that. I'm sorry, Chris. Killing me won't bring your cousin back, but if it brings you any peace, then go ahead and pull the trigger.
Gregory said, before slightly sighing and looking down at the ground.
I'll do it! Don't think I won't!
Chris said, sniffling, hands trembling.
Give me the gun, Chris.
Shiloh said softly, slowly reaching out for the shotgun in Chris's shaking hands. Shiloh gripped the gun, and Chris relinquished it to her, sobbing in pain at the final acceptance of his loss after all these years. Then, suddenly, Chris's body jerked forward, and his sobs became cries and gurgles as he began to spit up blood. Chris fell forward, unable to react, and Shiloh found the source of his sudden actions. There was a farming sickle sticking out the center of Chris's back. Then, suddenly, a second projectile came flying out of the darkness of the forest before it became embedded into the ground like a spear. It was a broken-off handle and a blade of an old, rusty pole saw. Shiloh, Ed, and Greg looked up to see two large figures lumbering out of the forest and into view. It was Casper and Jacob. The three of them turned again to run toward the road, but stopped when they found that the apparition of Dr. Clark was blocking their way. They were stuck between a rock and a hard place without any real escape. Sure, they could run, but they wouldn't make it far. So, they were left with only one option: to stay and fight. Shiloh dropped her bag to the ground and retrieved the remainder of her weapons from it. Together, the three of them opened fire, unloading every round of ammunition, pumping out every shell that they had into the three attackers. But it was no use. Guns had little to no effect on the trio of supernatural monsters.
Get out of here,
Greg said to Ed, and Shiloh sternly.
What do you mean?
Shiloh asked.
Go on. Get out of here and don't come back.
Greg yelled to her.
Promise me you won't come back.
Greg yelled again, holding up the last remaining pipe bomb from Shiloh's bag.
Stop, you can't.
Shiloh yelled, nearly in tears.
Get out of here.
Greg yelled before lighting the fuse and charging towards the two monsters at the edge of the forest. Shiloh and Ed made a break for the forest, and they only had made it a few yards past the tree line when they heard a loud explosion from behind them. Their exit was cut off yet again, and they had to head back to whence they came, but at least now it was all downhill from here, making their trek down the mountain much faster and much easier. But they still weren't out of the woods. Finally, after running for several minutes, the camp came into view. It had taken them all so long to get up the mountain, but only a matter of minutes to get back down it. A good analogy for how the people here build the camp back up, only for the curse to destroy it once again. Shiloh and Ed had made their way back to the camp when Ed suddenly stopped in the middle of the road.
Why are you stopping? We're almost there.
Shiloh said.
Do you hear that?
Ed asked. The two of them listened for a moment, and clearly they could hear a whimpering, like a woman crying. Ed and Shiloh scanned across the lake with their eyes, following the sound of sorrowful sobbing. Night had fallen and darkness had settled in, but their eyes eventually settled on an area of the lake that was darker than the rest. It was as if a black mist was forming just a few yards off the shore, a black mist that eventually took shape. A small form, a silhouette of a woman with her face in her hands, crying woefully. Ed stepped forward toward the lake, but Shiloh grabbed his arm and shook her head, urging him not to go over there.
Come on, we have to help.
Ed whispered to her, before looking back out toward the lake. The dark figure no longer had her face buried in her hands. Now, she glared directly at them, eyes glowing red, and tears of blood flowing from those glowing eyes. Ed and Shiloh turned to run, but were both stopped by two small invading hands that punched into each of their torsos respectively.
Time for some open heart surgery.
Dr. Clark said quietly, with a sinister tone in her voice. Ed yelled in pain as Dr. Clark's invading hand ripped backwards and pulled his still beating heart from his chest before crushing it in her hand, and as his body fell to the ground, Dr. Clark turned her attention to Shiloh.
How about brain surgery?
Shiloh said, before pulling the trigger on a sawed-off shotgun held to the side of Dr. Clark's head. Dr. Clark vanished again into a cloud of black smoke, leaving the injured Shiloh enough time to get away. The woman climbed into her car and took off down the road, leaving the camp in a cloud of dust behind her. The defeated woman passed her friend Ray Bob's house on her way out of town, police tape crossing over the front door. Shiloh couldn't help but feel guilty. Everyone was dead because of her, and 2 people had needlessly sacrificed themselves just to save her. Why? Why was she always the one left alive? Why did this land, this lake, why did it take so much from her? So much from this town, so much from everyone around it. Shiloh thought that she could win. Maybe with enough firepower. She thought that she could kill the monsters at the lake. But instead, she lost. And now, she was responsible for more loss of life. The defeated woman drove off into the night, leaving the lake and all the darkness within it.
Well, it seems that no matter what you throw at it now, no amount of firepower can deny evil its desires. But if you desire more of the red stuff, don't let anything stop you and drop in again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.